The real monsters don't have claws or fangs. You know, they come with flowers, promises of everlasting love, and a shiny gold ring. They build a life right alongside you, become the father of your children, and then, when they're settled deep in your heart, they start swallowing your soul bit by bit. And the worst part is, no one hears your screams because the neighbors only see that perfect family you're pretending to have. My name is Elizabeth Ann Harper, but folks just call me Liz. I'm 85 years old now, and I've carried a secret for over half a century, eating away at my soul like rust on old iron. I was born and raised in Greenville, a little town in the Pennsylvania countryside, where the mornings were chilly and the nights kept family secrets closer than any deed to property. Their belongings. Most folks around here just know me as the kind old lady selling homemade cookies at the farmer's market on Sundays, always in a floral dress with a headscarf hiding my white hair. Few could ever imagine what I've carried in my heart since I was 23. Telling this story moves me so deeply. So, I ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It gives me the strength to go on and makes me feel like my story might help someone else. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to know who's listening to an old soul like me. I feel it's time to share my tale now. Not for myself, because I've learned to bear this burden, but for all the women like me, facing hell right in their own homes and staying silent out of fear, shame, or to protect their children. Maybe hearing my story will give someone the courage that took me so long to find. My life started out simple, just like any girl in rural Pennsylvania back in the 1940s. My father, James, worked the cornfields from dawn's first crow until the sky was full of stars. My mother, Margaret, tended the house. 5 children, and still found time to quilt blankets for sale at the market. I was the middle child in a family with 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Our house was small, with wooden floors and a roof that let sunlight slip through the cracks. We didn't have much, but we never lacked for food or respect among us. My father, tired from his work, still always smiled at us and never laid a hand on my mother. It was rare in those days when a husband was almost like the owner of his wife. Daughter, learn to stand on your own so you don't depend on any man, my mother would say as she taught me to quilt. And I did learn. I was the only one of the 5 children to finish grade school at our community school. My teacher, Miss Dorothy, saw my talent and convinced my parents to let me continue studying. That girl has bright eyes, James. It'd be a sin to waste it. Thanks to their big sacrifice, I became a teacher at 19. That was back in 1957, and for a farm girl in the countryside, becoming a teacher was like a miracle. I remember the pride in my father's eyes when I taught my first class at the very school I'd attended. Years before. I see your mother in you, but with a book in your hands instead of a needle, he said, his voice choking up. For 3 years, I taught the town's children, earning a modest wage to help the family. Girls my age were already married, some with 1 or 2 kids, while I stayed single, devoted to my students. The town gossip was unforgiving. She'll end up an old maid. Too much education scares off husbands, the old ladies would whisper. I pretended not to care, but deep down, I have to admit, I felt lonely sometimes. At the 4th of July celebration in 1960, I met Edward. He came from Pittsburgh to work as an accountant at the only bank open in town. He was tall, with fair skin, hair slicked back with cream, and a way of speaking that showed he'd been to a good school. When he asked me to dance, my heart raced faster than it ever had. Would you do me the honor of a dance, miss? He asked with a grace no local boy had. I accepted, feeling my face flush with embarrassment and excitement. We danced 3 songs in a row, and then he took me for a lemonade at the stand in the square. I've never seen a teacher as beautiful as you in all my life, he said, looking into my eyes in a way that took my breath away. You're just trying to make me blush, Mr. Edward, I replied, staring down at my lemonade glass. That night was the start of a romance that turned the whole town upside down. A city-educated man interested in James's farm girl daughter. The same old ladies who said I'd be an old maid were now whispering that I'd struck gold. They didn't know that Edward, for all his good job and fine clothes, had no inheritance or important family. He was just a boy who'd worked hard to learn, like me. Our courtship lasted 6 months, always with my father or one of my brothers tagging along on walks through the square or to the new theatre in the next town. Edward was so respectful and never overstepped. He'd bring simple gifts like a hair ribbon, a chocolate bar, and once even a little book of poetry we'd read together on my porch. He wanted to marry me. Elizabeth, he said one December night under the apple tree in our yard, with my brother watching from afar. If your father allows it, I want you to be my wife. My heart was about to leap out of my chest. At 23, I was starting to think marriage wasn't for me. And here I was, getting a proposal from a learned, hard-working, handsome man. I need to think about it. Edward, I answered, trying to hide my emotions. But the truth is, there was nothing to think about. It was everything I could dream of. The next week, Edward came to speak with my father, bringing a fine bottle of whiskey and a cigar. They talked for hours in the parlor while my mother, my sisters, and I waited anxiously in the kitchen. When the door opened, my father stepped out with a serious face but quickly smiled. Come here, my daughter. Mr. Edward seems a respectable man. If you want it, I'll give my blessing." The wedding was in March 1961 at the Little Women's Chapel in town. Nothing fancy. We couldn't afford it, but it was beautiful. My dress was sewn by my mother and aunts from lace they'd made themselves. Edward looked dapper in a navy blue suit borrowed from the bank manager. After the ceremony, we had a small party in our yard with food cooked by the family women and music from local musicians. Our house was small, but all our own. Edward rented a little 2-bedroom place near the bank with a living room, kitchen, and even an indoor bathroom, a luxury I'd never known. In those first months, I lived in the dream every girl of my time hoped for. Edward was so thoughtful, bringing me wildflowers on his way home from work, complimenting my cooking even when I overcooked the beans. And at night, he was gentle and respectful. I kept teaching even after we married. Many husbands wouldn't allow it, but Edward seemed proud of having a teacher for a wife. "My woman has to show she's got brains too," he'd say when someone questioned it. I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. 6 months after the wedding, when I found out I was pregnant, happiness felt complete. Edward teared up when I told him, his hands trembling as he touched my still flat belly. "She'll be a beautiful girl like you, Liz," he said with certainty, as if he could see the future. And he was right. Clara was born on a sweltering morning in January 1962 after a long, difficult labor, lasting nearly 20 hours. When the doctor placed her in my arms, all red and crying fiercely, I felt a love I'd never known before. And when I looked at Edward, I saw love overflowing in his face. "She's got your eyes, Liz," he said, using the nickname everyone would soon use. At that moment, I thought I'd found perfect happiness, a loving husband, a healthy daughter, a career I loved. What more could a woman want? Little did I know. That was just the beginning of the story. And the man I thought was my safe harbor hid a storm that would destroy everything we'd built. As my mother used to say, the devil wears a suit, ties a tie, and smiles at you before showing his claws. But that's a part too painful to tell right now. I'll need time to gather my strength and continue this story in our next meeting. In the meantime, I want you to ponder this. How many times have we judged a book by its cover? How many times is the monster destroying us the one we vowed to love till death do us part? If this story touches your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, listening to another's pain is the first step to healing your own. Part 2. The first weeks after Clara was born were pure joy, even with the exhaustion from sleepless nights and the jitters of first-time motherhood. Edward proved to be a devoted father. He'd come home early from the bank to help me, change diapers without a complaint, and sing our little girl to sleep with a voice I didn't even know he had. Our nights, once filled with talks about the future, were now all about the baby who completed our family. "She's got your nose, Liz," he'd say proudly, leaning over the crib my brother the carpenter made for his niece. And at that time, I thought we'd built heaven on earth with a family straight out of the love stories I told my students. When Clara was 3 months old, I went back to teaching. It was hard to leave her, even knowing my sister-in-law would watch her. She lived just 2 blocks away. But getting back to the chalk in my fingers, seeing the eager faces of the children, that was part of who I am. Edward supported my decision, though sometimes he'd mutter that when we had more kids. Maybe it'd be better if I stayed home. I agreed without much thought. In those days, a woman working outside was almost revolutionary. Clara's first year flew by like leaves in the wind. Before long, she was crawling all over the house, grinning with her new bottom teeth, calling Edward Daddy even before she called me Mommy. He was over the moon, buying toys we could barely afford, and planning for her future. "Liz, I'll send our princess to a good school. She'll be a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever she wants." Life went on in its rhythm. Clara grew up healthy and happy as a little bird. I kept teaching at the bigger school in town after a promotion for my hard work. Edward was doing well at the bank, promoted to supervisor. With everyone in Little Greenville, we were the picture of the perfect family. Around Clara's 3rd birthday, I noticed the first changes in Edward. Subtle things that outsiders wouldn't catch. He wasn't as eager to come home from work anymore, complaining more about the food, the expenses, the noise Clara made playing. "A man who works all day needs peace when he gets home," he'd say with an irritation I'd never heard before. I thought it was just fatigue. His new position came with more responsibilities and pressure. I tried to understand, cooking his favorites, keeping Clara quiet when he arrived, doing everything to please him, to bring back that smile that won me over on the 4th of July years ago. One night, Edward came home furious. There was an issue with an important account, and he blamed one of his subordinates. At dinner, he went on about it, using harsh words about the man I knew. "That incompetent fool will answer to me. I'll make him regret being born." "Calm down, Edward." I tried to soothe him, serving him more meat on his plate. "I'm sure it was a mistake. You can all sort it out tomorrow with cool heads." "I shouldn't have said a word." He slammed his fist on the table so hard the plates jumped, startling Clara. She started crying. "Don't tell me what to do, woman. What do you know about my work anyway?" I was frozen. In 4 years of marriage, Edward had never raised his voice at me like that. The man before me, his face twisted in anger, looked like a stranger. I picked up Clara, trying to calm her, while he stormed out, slamming the door. He came back late that night, reeking of whiskey. I pretended to be asleep when he entered the bedroom, afraid of what might happen. The next morning, he acted like nothing had occurred, made coffee for us, played with Clara, kissed me before leaving for work. I almost convinced myself it was a one-time thing that wouldn't happen again. But it repeated more often than I'd like to admit, outbursts over increasingly trivial reasons. One week, it was because I'd bought a new dress for Clara without asking. The next, because dinner wasn't ready when he got home. Then because he found a test I'd brought home to grade. "You're neglecting our daughter for kids that aren't even yours," he yelled, tearing up the papers that my students had worked so hard on. I started walking on eggshells in my own home, watching every word, every move, trying to predict the next storm. Clara, young but sensitive, changed too. The cheerful, chatty girl became quiet when her father was around, like she was trying to make herself invisible. Neighbors started asking questions. "Liz, is everything all right? You look so tired." Or, "Edward seems stressed lately." I'd brush it off, keeping up appearances. After all, family problems are handled within the family. That's what my mother always said. And I still loved Edward, or at least the man he used to be. In 1966, when Clara was 5, he got another promotion. Now he was branch manager, a prestigious position for a young man like him. There was a party at the bank with the mayor's speech and champagne. I tasted it for the first time. Edward was beaming that night. Once again, the charming, confident man I'd fallen for. He introduced me to everyone as my beautiful wife, the teacher Elizabeth, with such pride that I believed things might go back to how they were. For a few weeks, they did. He brought little gifts again, complimented my cooking, played with Clara when he got home. I started lowering my guard, allowing myself to smile without fear of setting him off. During that time, I found out I was pregnant again. When I told Edward about the baby, he hugged me tight, spun me around the room like when he learned about Clara. "This time we'll have a boy. Liz," he declared, as if he could decide. "A son will follow in my footsteps at the bank." Those pregnancy months were peaceful. Edward seemed to have tamed his inner demons, whatever had caused the outbursts before. At school, I cut back my hours to take better care of myself. With the principal's approval, he was a friend and confidant. Clara was excited about being a big sister and set aside some of her toys for the new baby. Our son was born in June 1967, a healthy boy with my olive skin and his father's bright eyes. Edward chose the name Thomas, a strong name for a future. "Businessman," he said, holding his son with almost reverent care. At first, everything was fine. Edward split his time between work and family. On weekends, he'd take Clara for walks, while I tended to the baby. But then, when Thomas was about 4 months old, he started getting sick often. Nothing serious, just colds, mild fevers, but enough to cause sleepless nights, crying non-stop, and exhaustion for all of us. That's when Edward's behavior started changing again. The complaints came back, fiercer than before. Thomas's crying grated on him. "Something awful. I can't even think straight with this noise," he'd yell, slamming the door to the room where I retreated to soothe our son. Clara, now 6, became quiet and withdrawn around her father. One night, after a particularly rough day at the bank, Edward came home late and found the house a mess. Thomas had a fever all day. Clara spilled juice on the living room rug, and I was too exhausted to keep everything tidy as usual. "What is this pigsty?" he shouted as soon as he walked in. "I've been out all day busting my back for you, and this is how you treat me. Edward, please." I begged while Thomas cried from fever in my arms. "The boy's sick. I didn't have time." I couldn't even finish the sentence. For the first time, he raised his hand to me. The slap hit my face so hard I staggered back, almost dropping the baby. Clara, watching from her bedroom door, screamed a sound I'll never forget. "Daddy, no." Edward seemed to snap out of it when he heard his daughter. He looked at his own hand like he didn't recognize it. Then at me, with the red mark on my face, and at Thomas crying louder in my arms. He didn't say a word. He just turned and left, the echo of the slamming door behind him. That night marked the end of any illusions I still held about our marriage. The man I'd married, who promised to love and cherish me, had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed when I iced my face and rocked Thomas to sleep. Clara came over and sat beside me on the bed. "Mommy, why is Daddy so angry?" she asked in a voice so small I could barely hear it. How do you explain to a child that sometimes people change, that something breaks inside them and releases a darkness? Even they don't know. Daddy's just tired. Sweetheart. Sometimes adults do wrong things when they're tired. That was the only explanation I could muster then, though I knew it wasn't enough. Clara nodded with a wisdom beyond her years and leaned her head against me. "It'll be okay, Mommy. I'll take care of you and little Thomas." My heart ached even more hearing that. A child shouldn't have to protect her mother. that night, lying next to my sleeping children. I promised myself I'd find a way out for them, gather the strength to do whatever it took. The worst was yet to come, that the real monster lurking in Edward hadn't shown itself yet. And when it did, my life would change forever in ways I couldn't imagine. Part 3. When a house starts to crumble. The first signs are almost unnoticeable. A small crack in the wall you can paint over, a drip under the floor you ignore, a strange odor you convince yourself is just your imagination. That's how my marriage began to fall apart, quietly, without fanfare. But with a persistence I only recognize now, looking back. The man I met at the 4th of July, who won me with poetry and kindness, was changing slowly, so gradually I barely noticed as that generous smile gave way to a closed-off expression, as those loving eyes turned cold, as the hands that once caressed clenched into fists. After Thomas was born, our second child, things deteriorated quickly. He was a sickly baby in his early months, crying a lot at night and needing constant care. I divided my time between tending to him, looking after Clara, who was 6 then, and keeping up with my teaching. I slept little, ate on the run, but still tried to keep the house neat so Edward had no reason to complain. But reasons always appeared. Dinner not hot enough, or toys scattered in the living room, or Thomas crying too much. The complaints came with increasingly sharp looks and bitter words. A woman who can't keep her house in order doesn't deserve to be called a wife, he'd say, throwing dishes into the sink and shattering the set that was my mother's wedding gift. I swallowed my tears, cleaned up the mess, put the children to bed, and lay down next to him, keeping as much distance as possible. I told myself it was just a tough phase, that Edward was under work pressure, that things would soon return to normal. My elderly neighbour, Mrs. Connie, said men get like that when she saw my red eyes from crying. You have to be patient, dear. Marriage is like that. And I tried to be patient, praying every day for strength, for God to bring back the Edward I'd loved. But my prayers seemed to fall on deaf ears. The day he first hit me marked the start of a new chapter in our marriage. Not just the physical pain that shocked me, but the terrible realization that something fundamental had broken. The man who'd vowed to love and honor me before God and the community had raised his hand against me, and worse, done it in front of our daughter. "Mommy, don't cry," Clara said, her small hands wiping my tears as I held Thomas, trying to calm him after the outburst. "I'll take care of you." Those words from a little girl shattered my heart. What kind of mother was I, needing comfort from my own child? What example was I setting for her about what a woman should accept from a man in the days that followed? Edward swung between intense remorse, bringing flowers, begging forgiveness, swearing it would never happen again, and new explosions over pettier reasons. I started noticing changes in Clara's behavior. The joyful, talkative girl who ran around the yard chasing butterflies now walked with her head down, spoke less, and trembled when her father raised his voice. On Sundays, when he'd take her for walks in the park, she'd come back quiet, with a distant look unfitting for a child her age. "Don't you want to go for walks with Daddy anymore, sweetheart?" I'd ask when she hid under the bed at the sound of Edward calling. "No." "Mommy," she'd answer, her eyes full of fear. "I don't want to be alone with him." Something in the way she said it made my heart tighten. I wanted to ask more, to understand what was behind that fear. But Edward was at the bedroom door, impatient. "What's this? Are you spoiling her? Get up and go, girl." He pulled her arm and took her out while she looked at me pleadingly. I stayed home with Thomas, feeling uneasy, with a nameless dread. When they returned a few hours later, Clara ran straight to her room without meeting my eyes. Edward acted normal, even cheerful, bringing candy for both. That night, I sat by Clara's bed to tell her the story she always wanted before sleep. She wrapped herself in the blanket, though it was warm, like she was hiding from something. "What happened on your walk today, my love?" I asked, stroking her hair. She was silent for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she whispered so softly I could hardly hear. "Daddy took me to a place. He said it's our secret." "Where?" "Sweetheart, there's a house at the end of Market Street. A man was taking pictures there." My blood ran cold. What kind of pictures? Clara curled up even more. "I don't know exactly. Daddy told me to take off my dress. It was a special job. He got angry when I cried. That night, I couldn't sleep. My head buzzed with horrific thoughts, a dreadful suspicion of what might be happening. I wanted to confront Edward right away, but something told me to be careful. If my fears were true, facing him directly could endanger me and the children. The next day, under the pretense of buying bread, I walked by Market Street to find the house Clara mentioned. I found a makeshift photography studio with a discreet sign out front. Not brave enough to go in. I just watched from a distance. I saw Edward arrive, greet the man at the door like an old acquaintance, and go inside. I went home, shaking with a bitter certainty forming in my chest. I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I knew something was wrong, something hurting my daughter. In the days that followed, I became more vigilant, watching every interaction, between Edward and Clara. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. The way he insisted on bathing her, even though she was old enough to do it herself. How he often pulled her onto his lap, even when she clearly didn't want to. The way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. One night, I quietly entered Clara's room and found her crying silently into her pillow. "What's wrong, my angel?" I asked, sitting beside her. "Mommy," she sobbed. "I don't want Daddy to come into my room at night anymore. He does things that hurt me." Those words were like a knife to my heart. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The reality hit me hard. My husband, the father of my daughter, was abusing her. "What happened, Clara?" I asked with a choked throat, needing to be sure, even though every word was torture. In sobs, she told me details no child should know, things no child should experience. She spoke of nights he'd come into her room when he thought I was asleep, the threats he made to keep her quiet, the pain and confusion she felt. I held my daughter tight, letting my tears flow. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this happen under my own roof? Guilt overwhelmed me, mixed with a rage I'd never felt before. "Never again, my girl," I promised, cupping her face in my hands. "He'll never touch you again, I swear it." That night, while Edward slept, I packed a small suitcase with some clothes and important papers. I planned to leave at dawn, take the children to an old teaching colleague's house in another town. But as I finished, I heard the bedroom door open. Edward was standing there, staring at the suitcase on the bed. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice calm in a dangerous way. "I'm leaving," I replied, trying to sound firm despite the fear gripping me. "And I'm taking our children with me." He laughed, cold and cruel. "You really think I'll let you take my children, that you'll survive without me, who'll give you a home, food, clothes? You're nothing without me. Elizabeth, I'd rather starve on the street than spend another day under the same roof as you." I shot back. The courage came from somewhere. I don't know where. "You know what you did to Clara. You know about the studio, the pictures. You know what you do when you think I'm not looking. You're a monster." Edward. It was like lighting a fuse. His face contorted into a mask of hate. And before I could defend myself, I felt his punch to my face. I fell back, dazed, the taste of blood in my mouth. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, grabbing the suitcase and throwing the clothes on the floor. "And if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I swear I'll end you and those kids. Who do you think they'll believe me?" the respected bank manager. Or you, a dull school teacher. I stayed on the floor, pretending to submit while he kept threatening. But inside, something had shattered forever. Any love or respect I had left for him was gone. Instead, a fierce determination rose in me to protect my children at all costs. That night, lying next to the man I'd realized was my enemy, I vowed silently I'd find a way to leave that house, to save my children from that man, even if it was the last thing I did. What I didn't know was that opportunity would come sooner than I expected, on an April night that changed our lives forever. Part 4. There are nights that etch themselves into your soul like scars. April 7th, 1969 is one of them. I remember every detail, every sound, every smell, as if it were yesterday, not over 50 years ago. It was a Wednesday. I recall because it was prayer meeting night at church, and I got home late. Edward didn't like my church visits. He said prayer was a waste of time when I had a house to run, but I insisted. Those hours in God's house were the only peace I felt all week, away from the constant fear. Thomas, almost 2, had gone to bed early, worn out from running around all day. Clara, 8 years old, should have been asleep too. Edward was out for a bank meeting, or at least that's what he said. I arrived home around 9 and the silence was strange. Usually, he'd be back complaining about my lateness. I put my rosary in the drawer, slipped off my shoes to be quiet, and checked on the children. Thomas's room was peaceful. He was sleeping on his stomach as always. But when I reached Clara's bedroom door, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A muffled whimper, like someone trying not to make a sound, even in desperation, and his whispering threats. If you tell your mother, she won't believe you. And if she does, it'll be your fault. I pushed the door open instinctively. The sight I witnessed was worse than any nightmare I could imagine. Clara was huddled against the wall, tears streaming down her face, eyes wide with terror. And Edward, oh Lord, how do I say this? The man I'd chosen as the father of my children was there with his pants undone, seeing me. His face twisted into rage. "What are you doing here? You should be at church." I didn't answer. Something primal took over me. A strength I didn't know I had erupted from inside. I lunged at him, grabbing his hair with a ferocity I didn't recognize in myself. He stumbled back, shocked by my reaction. I used that moment to scoop up Clara and run from the room. "You crazy woman! Get back here!" he shouted as he pulled up his pants and chased us. "Run! Daughter, get your brother and go to Mrs. Evelyn's house," I whispered to Clara. pushing her toward Thomas's room. She hesitated, her eyes still full of fear. "Go, sweetheart, please. I'll hold him off." I don't know where that courage came from. Maybe from anger. Maybe from a mother's instinct. When Edward tried to get past me to the children, I blocked him like a wall. "Get out of my way, you bitch. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me. They're my children. You monster!" I screamed, not caring if the neighbors heard. He tried to shove me aside, but I clung to him. A few weeks earlier, I'd hidden a pair of sewing scissors under the mattress, fearing I might need to defend myself someday. I never thought it'd come to this. But as we struggled in the narrow hallway, I remembered. I broke free for a second and dashed to the bedroom. He chased me, laughing in that cruel way he'd developed over the years. "What do you think you're going to do, Liz? Think you can stop me?" I grabbed the scissors from under the mattress and turned, holding them steady. "Stay away from me and my children." He stopped at the door, surprised for a moment, then laughed again. "You don't have it in you. Don't test me. Edward, for God's sake, don't test me today." Something in my voice must have conveyed the seriousness, because he stepped back. Just then, I heard the front door open and voices. Clara had managed to get out with Thomas and call for help. It was Mr. Joseph, the neighbor across the street, and two other men I didn't recognize right away. "What's all this yelling? Everything all right? Mrs. Liz, Mr. Joseph asked cautiously as he entered the living room. Edward switched demeanors instantly, like only predators can. Suddenly, he was the charming, educated man everyone knew. "Nothing's wrong, Mr. Joseph. Just a marital spat. The wife, my Elizabeth, gets anxious sometimes. You know how it is." But Clara, my brave girl, wouldn't let the lie stand. "He hurt me. Mr. Joseph. He does bad things to me." The silence after her direct words was like thunder. Mr. Joseph and the other men looked at Edward, then at me, still holding the scissors, then at the children. Something in Clara's eyes, the real terror no child could fake, must have spoken louder than 1,000 statements. "You'd better come with us, Edward," one of the men said, and I realized it was Sheriff Davis. "We'll talk this over at the station." "This is ridiculous." Edward protested, but his voice lacked its usual power. "It's just a confused child's word against mine. I'm the respected bank manager in this town, and I'm the father of those children." The sheriff replied coldly, which comforted me. "We'll sort this out properly." As they took Edward away, Mrs. Evelyn, the neighbor Clara had run to, hugged me tight. "It's going to be okay, Liz. It's over now." But I knew it wasn't over. It was just the beginning of the ordeal. In a small town in the 1960s, an accusation like this against a man of Edward's standing wouldn't be easy to uphold. People like him had power, connections, respect just for being men in authority. At the station, I was treated like I was the criminal. "Are you sure about this, ma'am? Maybe you misunderstood. Your husband is a respected man in the community." Clara was spared a formal interrogation thanks to Father Michael, who came to the station as soon as he heard. "That child has been through enough trauma. If you need her statement, do it carefully and with a doctor present. Edward was only in jail one night." The next day, he was released on bail. Rumors spread through the town. Is it true? Or did Liz make it up because he's got another woman? That girl always had an imagination. Maybe she exaggerated everything. A hard-working man like Edward. It can't be true. Mrs. Evelyn took us in for the following days. I wasn't brave enough to go back home, afraid Edward might show up. My children were scared, especially Clara, who woke up screaming every night. "It's all right, my love," I whispered, holding her close. "I'll never let anyone hurt you again. Never." But how could I keep that promise? I had nowhere to go. No savings. No family in town to help. My parents were gone, and my siblings were scattered, each with their own struggles. Then, I received a visit that would alter the course of our story. One afternoon, Father Michael showed up at Mrs. Evelyn's house with a woman in her 60s, neatly dressed with an air of quiet authority that made me trust her immediately. "Liz, this is Mrs. Lillian Stewart, the headmistress of the Girls' Academy in Lancaster." The priest introduced. "She heard about your situation and came to offer help." Mrs. Lillian extended her hand, and when I took it, I felt a certainty and reassurance. "My dear, Father Michael told me about your case. I'm here to offer you a teaching position at our academy and housing for you and your children in the staff quarters. It's a 3-hour drive from here. Far enough for a fresh start." I couldn't hold back the tears. It was as if the Virgin Mary herself had answered my desperate prayers. "But why?" "Ma'am, you don't even know me." Mrs. Lillian smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Let's just say I understand your situation more than I'd like. 20 years ago, a young teacher in circumstances like yours crossed my path. I couldn't help her as I should have. She took her own life a week later. I swore I'd never stand by and watch another woman suffer. A week later, under the protection of Father Michael and some good men from the community, we boarded a bus to Lancaster. I left the house, the belongings, most of our things behind. It didn't matter. What mattered was Clara and Thomas sleeping peacefully on the bus seats, finally free from the horror our home had become. As for Edward, I later learned he was transferred to a bank in a distant town. The scandal was hushed up, like so many involving men of status. No trial, no justice in the traditional sense, but we escaped him, and that's all that mattered then. In our first months in Lancaster, Clara barely spoke. She spent hours drawing dark, frightening scenes that broke my heart. Thomas, too young to fully grasp what had happened, adapted more easily to the new life. I worked hard, trying to prove my worth to Mrs. Lillian, striving to build a new home for my children. Gradually, with the help of a young doctor at the academy, Clara began to open up and share what had occurred. Not just that night I witnessed, but that the abuse had been going on for months. A secret she'd kept out of fear, shame, and confusion. He told me it was normal, Mommy, that all daddies do that with the daughters they love, that it was our special secret. Her words in that session destroyed me. How could I not have seen? How could I have let this happen right under my roof? The guilt consumed me. I lost many sleepless nights pondering the signs I should have noticed. The changes in Clara's behavior I'd dismissed as home stress or normal childhood phases. Dr. Helen helped me understand I wasn't to blame. Men like Edward are experts at hiding their crimes. They manipulate, threaten, create an environment where silence feels like the only safe choice. You did what you could. And most importantly, when you found out, you acted. Many women, out of fear or dependence, choose to just look but not act. You saved your daughter. Those words were comforting, but the scars from that night, from that discovery, never fully faded. I carry them with me to this day, after more than 5 decades. I remember drifting off to sleep so peacefully on that bus seat. You know, finally free from the horror that our home had been through. And about Edward. I didn't find out until later that he'd been transferred from the bank to a town far, far away. The scandal. It was all covered up, just like so many other messes involving folks in power. No trial, no real justice in the way we think of it. But we got away from him, and that was all that mattered back then. In those first months in Lancaster, Clara hardly said a word. She spent hours drawing those dark, frightening scenes that just broke my heart. Thomas. He was still too little to understand it all. I adapted to our new life more easily than I could have hoped. I worked so hard, trying to prove myself to Mrs. Lillian, building a new home for my children, bit by bit. And gradually, with the help of that young doctor at the institute, Clara started to open up and tell me what had really happened. Not just that night I witnessed, but the abuse that had been going on for months before I even knew. My poor daughter kept that terrible secret out of fear, shame, and confusion. He told her it was normal. You know, that all fathers did that to the daughters they loved, that it was our special secret. Oh, her words in that doctor's session just destroyed me. How could I not have seen it? How could I let something like that happen right under my own roof? That guilt, it just overwhelmed me. I lost so many nights of sleep, thinking about all the signs I should have noticed, all the changes in Marianne's behavior that I brushed off as just stress at home or normal growing pains. But Dr. Helen helped me understand that it wasn't my fault. Men like Edward, they're experts at hiding their crimes. They manipulate, they threaten, they create an environment of fear where silence feels like the only safe choice. You did what you could, she said, and most important, when you found out, you acted. So many women, out of fear or dependence, just look the other way and do nothing. You saved your daughter. Those words were a comfort. But the scars from that night, from that discovery, they never fully faded. I still carry them with me, even after all these decades. Decades. Not as an open wound anymore, but as a reminder of the price we pay for blind trust, for willful ignorance, and for believing we truly know the ones we love. As I write these lines, I think about all the women out there living in similar situations right now. How many children are suffering in silence, believing it's normal, or worse, that it's their own fault. In the end, I decided to share my story for those women and those children, because sometimes all it takes to find the courage to change your life is knowing that others have walked through that dark valley and come out the other side, not without scars, not without hurt, but still alive and healing in time. Part 5. When we arrived in Lancaster, it felt like being born anew. The Academy for Girls, run by Mrs. Lillian, was a place of order and peace, with well-tended gardens and quiet hallways. My children and I were given a little apartment in the teachers' quarters, with 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. After all we'd been through, it seemed like a palace. Those first months were a time of adjusting and healing. Clara started seeing Dr. Helen, who was so patient and gentle, helping my daughter work through the trauma she'd endured. Thomas, who was just 2 years old then, adapted so easily to our new life, charming everyone with his smiles and energy. As for me, I threw myself into my work, teaching English and literature to the little girls, finding solace in the routine of the classroom for my troubled mind. In 1971, nearly 2 years after we arrived, I noticed a deep change in Marianne. One Sunday afternoon, we sat on the little porch of our apartment. She was 10 years old by then, drawing in her notebook as usual. But something was different. Those dark and scary drawings had given way to colourful scenes. Flowers, butterflies, houses with open windows. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, feeling a spark of hope in my chest. "What are you drawing there?" She looked up at me, and for the first time in so long, I saw that light in her eyes that reminded me of the girl she was before it all happened. "This is our home, Mom. The one we'll have someday." In that moment, I knew we were on the right path. Maybe the worst was behind us. That didn't mean the scars were gone, they'd never fully disappear. But we'd learned to live with them, to keep moving forward despite it all. As time went on, I busied myself with work, the children's schooling, and those little daily joys I hardly noticed before, which now felt so precious. Thomas started school and showed himself to be a smart, curious boy. Clara, though she still had her tough days, began making friends at the academy, joining activities and laughing more than she had in years. In 1975, I received a letter that shook our newfound peace. It was from my sister, still living in Greenville. Edward was back in town and looking for us. He'd been drinking heavily and kept saying he was going to take his children back. My sister worried and wrote that he had no right to them. Be careful. Liz. That old fear came rushing back, cold and familiar in my stomach. I went straight to Mrs. Lillian, who took my trembling hands after reading the letter. "Don't be afraid. Elizabeth, he can't reach you here. You've got the protection of the academy, the church, and now my own personal safeguard." And she was right. Edward never made it to Lancaster. Later, I learned that. He was arrested for assaulting a bank teller in a rage and died in prison soon after from liver disease. I didn't feel joy at the news, or revenge. Not even relief, exactly. It was more like a strange sense of closure, as if a chapter had ended. And finally I could turn the page for good. In 1977, 10 years after Thomas was born and 8 years since our escape, I got an offer that would change our path again. The academy was expanding, and Mrs. Lillian invited me to take over managing the new elementary section. It was recognition for my hard work, for the dedication I'd shown all those years. She told me I had a gift for leadership, and more importantly, compassion. That's exactly what we need to shape these young girls. I accepted the challenge with a mix of excitement and worry. I'd never held a position with that much responsibility before. But I discovered she was right. I had something to give, a wisdom born from pain, a strength I didn't know I possessed. Under my guidance, the elementary section thrived. We brought in more modern teaching methods, added art and music to the curriculum, encouraging the girls to think for themselves, ask questions, and dream beyond the limits society put on them. "One educated girl is a free woman" that became our unofficial motto. It's something I believe in deeply, something I wish I'd learned sooner. Clara grew up watching my work and absorbing those lessons. At 17, she surprised me by saying she wanted to study law. I want to help women like us. Mom, she said, with a determination in her eyes that filled me with pride. I want them to know they have choices, that they have rights. In 1980, when Clara was accepted to Temple University Law School, I cried tears of joy and gratitude. My daughter, who had been through the worst of traumas, had turned her pain into purpose. Thomas, now 13, talked about becoming a doctor to care for people, just like Dr. Helen had cared for us. The 1980s brought changes for the whole country and for our family. With President Reagan in office, women were starting to take on roles they never could before. And me, at 46, I met William. He was a history professor, a widower with a kind and upright nature that scared me at first. After Edward, I'd built high walls around my heart. I didn't think I could trust a man again, let alone love one. William didn't push, didn't demand, and didn't rush. With the patience of someone who cherishes time, he slowly won my trust. It took nearly 3 years before I accepted his proposal. I don't bring perfection, Liz, he said as he gave me that simple engagement ring. Just honest love and a commitment to always respect who you are. We married in 1985 in a simple ceremony at the Academy's chapel. Clara, who'd graduated and was practicing law, and Thomas, then a medical student, were our honor attendants. Mrs. Lillian, older but still sharp, gave us her special blessing. With William, I learned that not all men are monsters, that you can build a relationship on respect, understanding, and walking side by side. It wasn't easy, mind you. There were times the past would crash over me like a wave, and I'd withdraw into my safe space. He never complained, never lost patience. Liz, he'd say, everyone has scars. I'm here for the good times and the bad, the sunny days and the storms. We had nearly 20 years together before cancer took him in 2004. Those were years of learning, growing, and quiet happiness I never thought possible. His passing left a void, but not an abyss. Unlike losing Edward, which felt like escaping a prison, losing William was like saying goodbye to a dear companion, with gratitude for all the miles we'd shared together. Today, at 85, I look back and see my life full of extremes, deep pain that nearly destroyed me, and pure joy that redeemed it all. I see my children, now grown with families of their own. Clara, a respected lawyer specializing in women's and children's rights. Thomas, a dedicated pediatric doctor with that gentle smile from his childhood. I see my grandchildren growing up in homes where respect is the norm, not the exception, where they know they're loved unconditionally. that they're safe, and that their voices matter. That, I suppose, is my greatest victory. I've broken the cycle of violence and created a new story for our family. If there's one lesson I've learned in 85 years, it's that suffering isn't the end. Even from the darkest ashes, something beautiful and strong can be born. That our stories aren't defined by others, no matter how powerful they seem, but by the choices we make in the face of adversity. To anyone watching this and maybe walking through their own dark valley, I want to say you're not alone. There's a way out. There's tomorrow. Oh, it wasn't the end, you know. Even from the darkest ashes, something beautiful and strong could rise up again. I remember our story wasn't defined by others, no matter how powerful they seemed, but by the choices we made when facing those hard times. It was those choices we made in the face of adversity that truly mattered. To anyone watching, maybe walking through your own valley of shadows, I'd say, you're not alone, dear. There's a way out, and there's always tomorrow. And then there's tomorrow. Healing might seem impossible when the pain is so raw and fierce, but believe me, you can rebuild, you can heal, you can find that joy again in your heart. If this story has touched your heart, why not leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear these words?